Hello, 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 everyone. My name is Patrick Rolland, and I'm the brand manager here at Paid Memberships Pro. I run a lot of the marketing stuff with my fantastic team. We are all very excited for today's webinar, Leverage Design Psychology to get into your buyer's brain and drive conversions. So we're very much looking forward to this. And I'm going to introduce the speaker here in just a second. I do want to go over a couple rules, points of information that you should just be aware of. Number one, we get asked this every webinar since the beginning of time has always been asked, is this being recorded? And the answer is yes, it is being recorded. I will go ahead and put this little ticker on the bottom. So it's going to be on the Paid Memberships Pro website. We have a little URL. Some of you may be watching it there right now. So you can go there. It'll be recorded there pretty quickly, as well as, and there's a different one here, Ross will also have some notes on this webinar on his site. So you can go to one or both of these sites for the notes /recording of this webinar. So yes, everything's being recorded, and you should find all the information at one of those two links. If you're on the mailing list, on our mailing list, and you got today's webinar reminder, you will also get a reminder when I like to go back over the webinars and write down my own sort of notes and break down the topic a little bit more. So we'll also add a little bit more content to that page. And you should be getting that if you got today's webinar reminder. There will be questions at the end. I'm a big fan of questions. So if you have questions while you're watching this, please, if questions pop into your head, please ask them to us. Because we hold them until the very end. Go ahead and ask them immediately. And if you have a better question later, I might see two near duplicates and throw out the first one and take the second one. So just ask questions when you have them. Otherwise, I'm the type of person where when I'm watching a talk, I have a great question. I'll save it to the end. Always gone. 100% of the time, it is gone by the end of the webinar. So please just ask them. That way we have a nice backlog of questions to get through. And I think that's also where you get a lot of value is, I think Ross is going to cover a lot of really awesome stuff today. And sometimes questions can be a little bit more practical about a specific use case. And I think I just want to highlight one more thing before we get going here, just to set the context of this webinar. I think almost everyone who's watching this probably wants to make more money with their membership site. That's probably what you're here to do, is my guess. Maybe some of you, maybe you're friends with my mom on Facebook or something like that. But I'm guessing most of you want to make more money in your membership site. And there's four ways to make money online: get more visitors to purchase, get more of them to purchase more, like a higher dollar value on your site, or get repeat customers. That's kind of the four ways just to make money online. And we're going to be, and most marketing advice always focuses on get more visitors. And that's great. Getting more visitors, usually a good way to increase revenue. The other one that no one spends enough time talking about is getting more visitors to purchase, to become paid customers. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's webinar. I think I've seen some of the slides. That's what I think we're going to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ross Johnson. He has been designing websites professionally for over 15 years. He brings a unique perspective to design, shaped by a lifelong love of the fine arts and his education in technology, business, and social science. And he also has a long history with the web design community. He's co-founded a bunch of different events, Refresh Detroit, WP Ann Arbor, and LA2M. So without further ado, please everyone welcome Ross Johnson. Take it away.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everybody being here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So, I'm just going to dive right in. So today we're going to be talking about leveraging design psychology to get into your buyers' brains and drive more conversions. And I want to start off with a little story. So a couple years back, a client came to us, and specifically they were in the robotic process automation industry. So this is a new form of artificial intelligence and machine learning where you can actually create these little software bots. They're technically just software programs that run on servers that can automate all these sort of little menial tasks, like going through resumes for job applications and looking for flags to say, move these ones forward and reject these ones, send out a rejection notice, or potentially scanning emails for invoices and then automatically entering these into like your accounting system. So this really powerful new technology and capability that's been evolving over the last few years. is what this client did. Now, they work primarily for large multinational corporate clients. So they, in order to really take advantage of this, you need to be kind of at an enterprise level. It's moving a little bit more downstream now, but previously, you wanted to be a big company to take advantage of this because you're only going to gain so much, freeing up one person. What they're looking to do is try and free up an entire team that was previously going in and doing all this sort of manual things, manual data entry, day to day. And they came to us, and their website, I would say, here's kind of a rough approximation of what it was originally, was perfectly usable. It was aesthetically pleasing. There was really nothing wrong with it. When we looked at it, it seemed fine. It seemed great. But what they told us is that they were getting no leads at all, no activity. They could see people were coming to it. They'd spend time on it. It seemed like generally the right sort of people, but it just never resulted in any qualified leads, not even one. So they asked what we recommended we do. And we said we need to start from scratch and focus on leveraging design psychology. And a big part of this, as you'll see, is this kind of discovery phase where you're spending a lot of time researching and learning more about your target audience. And after doing the research and spending time researching their audience, we discovered the problem. We figured out why, even though the right people were getting on the site, they never seemed to actually take the next step and turn into a conversion, turn into a lead. And the reason was their current messaging, the messaging when we started engaging, was focused on what is robotic process automation? What are the benefits of robotic process automation? How can you use robotic process automation in your business? And these are all things really kind of selling the idea of robotic process automation. But the problem is the prospects were already bought into this idea of robotic process automation. A lot of times had been mandated, you need to bring this to our company. You need to make this successful. So it wasn't a choice. They weren't landing there trying to decide, do I want to use this or not? They knew that they wanted to move forward. They knew that they had to move forward. But the issue was what they were looking for is not why RPA, but why our client? Why you? Why should we pick you to work with? And more specifically, more deep down, what they wanted to know was, will you save me? See, the problem that they were running into kind of on an individual and emotional level was they felt way over their head. They felt like they were drowning. Here's this big new technology, and there's all these different platforms that you could use. It's not something they could implement themselves. Their IT team was overloaded. They didn't know anything about it, but they did know it was important. In fact, their bosses were saying, this is going to be an important part of the company's success moving forward. We know our competitors are doing it. It's going to be a big part of your career moving forward. So they needed someone to save them. That's what they were looking for on the site. So we shifted the messaging and the design to focus more in the structure of the site, both the pages and the site itself, to focus more on how they could help at any stage of adoption. Are you an early stage, meaning you haven't done it yet, you just know that you need to? Are you middle stage, where you've maybe run a few RPA programs, but they didn't quite turn out? Or are you late stage? You've had some successes, but now you need to scale it from one location across the entire enterprise. We also included messaging on guidance on how to be successful, case studies and previous outcomes, proving that we have saved people before, and then education on implementing RPA programs. So after this, you can see the redesign here where we focused a bit more on what stage of the journey they're on and kind of calling out the various different ways that they can engage in an RPA program. They went from 0 leads to generating some of the biggest net new leads in company history. So leads that haven't contacted them through some of their partners. And this is a really good example of using design psychology. By getting deep into their prospect's brain, we understood where the disconnect was and how we can structure the messaging, the design, the content, the key pages so that it resonated with their target audience, so that it hit all the notes that that target audience was looking for, so that it got them excited, so that we could communicate that this is this company, this is the group of people that's going to save you, and encourage them to move forward. So today, what we're going to be talking about is the 5 steps that we take at 3.7 Designs, the agency I'm from, to get deep into our buyers' brains and create conversion-focused websites and web pages. So this could be a landing page, it could be an overall site. Really, the concepts apply universally. And those steps are doing what we call a saturation dive, which is basically diving deep into your audience's psyche to better understand them. you've gotten through the saturation dive into an actionable, what we call a buyer model, which we'll discuss a little bit further. Now, the insights that you've gained and distilled in those first two steps are going to lead you to identifying what's the correct messages, what do we need to tell people, and what should the tone be. And then you can figure out what the structure of your key pages are. How do we structure and build these and design these so that they're going to walk people through their buyer's journey and get them to convert at a higher rate? And then finally, what are the calls to action? When we're going to ask somebody to do something, what do we want to ask them to do? And how do we make sure that, again, we structure those so that it matches both their emotional thoughts and their logical thoughts and encourages them to move forward? So let's dive right in and talk a little bit first about the saturation dive. Now, before I get into the nitty gritty of how exactly we go about doing the saturation dive, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you should be thinking about and approaching your website. So if you have a membership site and you're trying to get more people to sign up for the membership, then there's probably a few different reasons why your website exists. In fact, this is pretty universal for all websites. Typically, there are business objectives. So these are the reasons your website exists kind of overall. What do you want to get out of it? Which might be more subscriptions, more customers. In your case, if you have a membership site. In our client's case, they wanted more leads. They wanted more business. But even if you think about, some social goodwill websites, you want maybe people to buy in and believe and take action and volunteer. So there's always these business objectives, whether it's a business or not, that the reasons why your website exists. Now, there's also user needs. So these are the reasons that somebody actually visits your site. So, most of the time people aren't doing it randomly. There's something they want to get out of it. We're all busy. There's all things that we want to do throughout our day and things we're trying to accomplish. So there is a reason that people are landing your site, even if it's entertainment. But although in this case, there's probably some bigger problem they're trying to solve. Now, what you want to try and do throughout this process is identify what we kind of call the critical overlap. This is the places where your business objectives overlap with the user's needs. What's the situation where you kind of both win? If you can prioritize those things, your website tends to be a bit more effective. Now, to kind of go into it a little bit deeper, what we typically see on a lot of websites is that if you kind of split this up into kind of two groups, there's, what you want, the reasons why your website exists, and there's what your users want, which is the reason somebody visits your site. Now, what we often see is that there's an over prioritization of what we want. So the things that we want out of the site, these are the things that we're trying to really focus and bang on with every single page. What do we want to tell people? What pages do we want? What imagery do we want to use? It's a lot of kind of very self-focused. What does the business want? And then an under prioritization of what users want. So all the focus is on what we want and not enough on what users want. When in reality, it should probably be closer to this, because ultimately the users, the people coming to your site, your target audience, they're the ones who are going to decide whether your site's successful or not. They can leave at any moment. There's no lack of things for them to do. They're probably super busy. There's other sites. There's competitors. So really, we need to prioritize what they want, their needs, their interests, what they're trying to get out of it, and deprioritize what we want a little bit. Now, if you find that overlap, it's really not going to feel like much of a deprioritization because, when the users win, you win. Now, the other aspect in a similar vein that I see kind of misconceptions around is this idea of logic and emotion. So, when we make big decisions, which could mean signing up for a membership site, choosing a new program, filling out a lead form, requesting a consultation, purchasing a big product, we tend to think that decision is primarily done by emotion or by logic. We're logical beings. We have conscious thought. We think things through clearly. We have rational thought. We weigh our options. We make comparisons, that sort of thing. And emotion, sure, maybe in some circumstances, it's an influence in the decision. But in reality, we might think it looks like this. Logic's very prioritized. Emotions plays a small role. It's actually the opposite. We are very emotional beings. We actually make decisions based on emotion first and then later justify it using logic. There's a big portion of our brain, the limbic system and the reptilian part of our brain, that is the most subconscious portion of our brain, and it still drives a lot, if not most, of our behaviors, which we then use logic to justify later, even though we've already made that decision based on emotion. So if you think back to the last really big decision you made, maybe you bought a house, maybe you decided to start a new relationship, leave a job, join a new job, buy a big ticket item. if you think about really what ultimately made the decision, it was probably a gut feeling. It felt right. It feels like this is the right direction. And then later, you probably justified it with logic with all these different things, but really it's the emotion that was driving that behavior. And there's a really famous study that really demonstrated and proved this, where there's some people who had a very specific type of brain damage that essentially caused it so they couldn't feel emotion. All their thought processes were exactly the same, other than the fact that they no longer had the capacity to feel emotion. What they found is these people couldn't even make the most basic of decisions. What cereal do you want? Cereal do you want to eat in the morning? They couldn't make that decision, because even what cereal you want in the morning, what should I have for breakfast? Ultimately, there's an element of an emotional decision there that you then use logic later to justify. So what it comes down to is that decisions are made primarily by emotion and later justified by logic. And you need to understand the deep underlying motivations that your target audience is going through, those emotional motivators that's causing them to do something, to land on your site, to consider spending money on your membership site. And then what logical justifications are they looking for in order for them to say, yes, this was the right decision, in order to maximize the success of your website. If you're designing your site or have designed your site without this information, you're simply guessing and you're not going to see the full possible results. So you really need to understand these two pieces in order for any of the other things we talked about in this webinar to work. So audience discovery. How do you figure this out? Ultimately, it comes down to doing research. When the first few times you do this, it's probably not going to be fun until you really start teasing out some insights, and then you'll be so excited about the possibility, the small tweaks you can make to your site, to your messaging, to your pages in order to make them more effective, because it'll become very clear very quickly where you've got some disconnect. So you need to do research. You need to find out as much about your target audience as possible. And what I recommend is collect as many data points as possible, and volume is key. Trying to look at a variety of different places to collect information, to validate information against each other is really, really valuable. Because if you only kind of go down one avenue, there's a chance that you might be kind of pushed in the wrong direction, because you keep hearing the same thing over and over again. It seems really important, but it turns out you just talked to two or three people who kind of had the similar experience. So where are you going to get this information? There's a variety of different places and ways you can do it. So obviously, talking to your existing customers is huge. If you can incentivize your existing customers to talk to you, so you can better understand, their thought process, their motivations, what they were going through, and we're going to go through some of those questions that you're looking to answer in the next slide. That can be really huge. But also just talking to people who kind of fit your target demographic, or even talking to people who didn't purchase. Sometimes you can get more out of that than talking to the people who did purchase. Where was there a disconnect? Why weren't you motivated to purchase? But you could also potentially talk to leadership if there's kind of somebody higher up than you, depending on your role in this whole thing. Maybe you're a designer developer yourself, doing client services. You could talk to leadership. They might have some insight into these things. Talking to salespeople. So anybody who's involved in sales is having conversations, answering pre-sales questions, or having direct conversations with people who are interested in buying but not buying yet. Customer support is a huge one. A lot of times if there's something missing or not quite right, that will come across as a customer support question. And you can see where those things are. Obviously, website analytics, there's some split between correlation and causality, but it doesn't hurt to see the patterns. What pages are people spending most time on? What are they searching for on your site if they're using a website search? Those sorts of things. What pages are they landing on? And then looking at competitors' websites. Maybe they've done this sort of research, and you can kind of pull out some patterns and see what are they focusing on. And then if you're lucky enough that your target audience is on social media and easy to find, you can actually go in and just kind of pay attention to the conversations they're having. That can be a huge source of valuable information. Now, so while you're doing this research, there's kind of a handful of questions that you're really trying to look for answers for. So all these different data points kind of distill down to, trying to better understand, how do they realize there's a problem? One day, everything is perfectly fine. They're waking up. They don't feel like they don't need to do anything. And the next day they wake up and say, hey, I need to do something about this. This needs to change. Understanding that trigger can be really important. What emotions are they feeling throughout the process? Because you're going to approach it very differently if somebody's, really excited at this idea of something new. They have a lot of energy around it versus if they're really scared or fear driven. The whole approach is going to be slightly different. So understanding those emotions is really important. What are they doing from realization to purchase? So, we talk about that trigger. Well, what happens between that trigger and ultimately making a decision? So we call this the buyer's journey. What journey do they go through? What steps do they go through to figure out what's the best solution for them, both in terms of overall approach, what type of solution? Like, maybe they're signing up for a membership site, but maybe they're buying a book, or maybe they're hiring a coach or something like that. And understanding that, you'll realize or get a better sense of like what are the points that they're going to hit your website. Which is one of the issues that we ran into with our client was they were really kind of targeting really early in the buyer's journey, when in reality people were arriving on the site much later. Understanding what are they actually trying to accomplish. We'll get into this a bit more, but this is kind of getting, again, deep down into the motivations, the deep motivators that are driving them forward. Then kind of more surface level, what questions are they trying to answer? They're probably trying to figure some things out before they decide if they're going to purchase or not. What objections do they have that might hold them back? What factors influence their decisions? What are the criteria that make a big difference? What's deep down motivating them? What are they thinking throughout the process? And, why is this important to them? So kind of a big, trying to create a complete understanding of their thought process, both on a surface logical level, but also kind of like the emotional drivers down below. Now, once you've done your research and your discovery, you're going to create what's called a buyer model. So we call this buyer modeling. So one of the things you'll find very quickly is you've gone through, maybe you've talked to 3 to 5 people, maybe you've looked at your competitors' websites, taken notes, you've looked at website analytics, you've searched on social, and it's going to create this huge wealth of notes. You're going to have tons of information, and it's very hard to act on. And this is where the buyer models come in. So, typically you might be familiar with the idea of a buyer persona. And if you're not, I'll explain it real quick. So basically the idea of a buyer persona is it's kind of a fictional representation of one of your core target audience segments. So you take, your core target audience segment, maybe it's like students, age 24 to 30, and you create a fictional representation of them. This is, Sam Green, and here's her circumstances. You give her a name, that sort of thing. And those are fine, but the issue that we've always had with buyer model or buyer persona is they tend to be very focused on demographics, which might not be all that important. Like, what's their age and where do they live and what's their family and what are they interested in? And those things, typically don't matter that much compared to psychographics, which is, what are they thinking? What pain points do they have? What's motivating them? That sort of thing. So a buyer model is the same idea. You're creating a fictional person, but you're focusing a lot more on different things. So really what we do with the buyer model is we first look at what emotions are driving people. Like, what are they feeling? And there's kind of a common set of emotions that all humans feel, a common range. And then what are those motivators? What are these deep emotional motivators? So we know maybe they're feeling scared, but what are they scared of? Again, kind of a deep emotional level. And then we surface on kind of more of the actual practical things that are happening, trying to understand what are they doing throughout the process, what are they thinking, what questions do they have, and what objections do they have. And then finally, we do layer on personality and story because it makes it much easier to think of them as a real person. So when you're making decisions or trying to make a decision as far as how do I structure something, what I call something, what should I say here, it's much easier to reflect back and say, what would Sam feel about this? What does Sam want to know at this stage versus something kind of more abstract, or the worst case scenario, you're thinking about what would I want to see here, which is never accurate because you're never the target audience. You know too much. So ultimately, it's a framework for synthesis. It's a way to take all of that data and just kind of put it into a structured format so that you can very easily identify what do I need to do to my site in order to make it more effective. So some of the things that we'll do in our buyer models, and I'll have a link at the end where you can actually download our workbook to go through and do this on your own site. So you can use the exact deck that we use at the agency to go through and fill out this information. And some of the things we do, one is create jobs to be done statement. So the idea with a job to be done statement is really just kind of distilling down the surface level thing that they're trying to accomplish and understand what's that deep root emotional motivator that lies beneath it. And really kind of the easiest way to get to this is figure out what is that, top level issue. Like, I need a new car. I'm trying to find a new car. and keep asking, why is that important? You can even do this if you're interviewing people. You'll say, what were you trying to accomplish? And when they say, I just needed a new car, you can say, why was that important? And you continue to ask, why was that important? It's called the 5 whys, until you get down to that kind of deep emotional motivator. So in this example, like, I need a new car, if we were to do that, we might learn that the old car was unreliable. And that was important because the kid, this person was taking the kids to daycare and had to go to work every day. And then why was that important? Well, safety is important. Well, why is safety important? Well, I'm trying to keep my kids safe. And why do you want to keep your kids safe? Well, it's like, well, I want to be a good parent. So we can see, buying a car, which seems, potentially like this mundane thing, in this situation, really the deep underlying motivator could be being a better parent. The next thing we try and figure out is understanding the buyer's journey. So, I talked about this earlier, but at some point there's a trigger that says that happens, and all of a sudden people realize they need to do something, and there's kind of all these stages they go through in trying to determine what they should do in order to solve this problem that has occurred, including at some stage they know that they have a problem. They don't know all the different ways to solve it. And then they move into a stage where they figure out, okay, this is the way I'm going to solve it. I'm going to sign up for a course. I'm going to sign up for a membership site. I'm going to hire a coach, that sort of thing. And then maybe they're evaluating the different options, and then ultimately they purchase. This can happen really quickly in a matter of minutes, or can happen over months or years. And understanding that journey is going to help you make better decisions. Then we create what's called an empathy map. And this is really, again, trying to understand what feelings they have and what they're going through. So there's kind of a common set of emotional motivators that we'll look through and see, okay, which of these motivators is motivating this person? For example, succeeding in life, feeling secure, having confidence in the future, trying to understand what are their anxieties, what are they worried about throughout the process, what logical thoughts are they having, and how are they feeling throughout the process as well. This becomes really important when it comes to actually designing the key pages on your site. And then to justify the logic portion of it, or address the logic portion of it, then we look at the logic map, where we're just trying to kind of flesh out some of these key logical points so we can help them justify the feelings that they're having. This feels like the right decision, but they're going to be looking for logical reasons to justify it. And we want to give those to them so that they're spending less mental effort trying to come up with them on their own. Or worst case, they can't come up with any, and then that might, shift their direction. So we'll look at things like, what do they want to know when they're landing on your site? This could be about your offering specifically, what's included, how will this benefit me, how much does it cost? They might want to know about your company. They want to know how long you've been around, how many people are there, how large is it, maybe about logistics. Are there refund periods? What happens if I'm happy? What happens if I have trouble? What's the process like? How long does it take? Those sort of things. And it's important to flesh all these sort of things out. We don't want anybody to have kind of an unleft question. That can be a reason that somebody doesn't move forward. You also want to know what alternative options they have. If they don't go with you, what might else they go with? So this could be direct competitors, or it could be indirect competitors. Like the information that you have on your membership site, maybe they could get through YouTube for free, or maybe they could read a book, or maybe they could hire a coach, that sort of thing. Then understanding what's their decision criteria, kind of pulling all that out of the research that you've done. Documenting the common objections so you can address those before it comes time to convert. And then how does your product or service uniquely and best solve their problems? So this is a place where, the job to be done statement, understanding their emotional motivations is really important, because you are going to approach this differently if you classify the problem as I need a new car, compared to the problem is I want to be a better parent. The whole approach is going to be completely different. Not that you're going to be, everything's going to be unrelated to purchasing the cars, but just kind of the approach of how you talk about it, the overall look and feel, how everything's structured is going to be very different. So once you've done those things, you'll have a better opportunity to kind of condense all this and understand how you're going to tell them and show them how your product or service uniquely and best solves their problem. So once you've done all this, you now have maybe 3 to 4 buyer models that give you a really clear representation of who's coming to your site, what they're looking for, what they're feeling, what's motivating them, what do they want to know, what else are they considering, what objections do they have, how are they going to make a decision, and how you think you can best solve their problem. And from this, it's time to start thinking about, what does that mean for what do we need to tell them? Like, what blocks of content do we need to have? What do we need to address? And what should the tone be? So the tone being both the written tone, so messaging tone, but also the tone of the design itself. They both say something, they both have a tone. It can be very exciting and bold, it can be very understated, it could be very casual, it could be very formal. These are the things you're trying to figure out. So both what are we trying to say, and what's the tone of what we're saying. And one way we like to do this is using what's called the story brand framework. So when it comes to trying to understand what should the narrative be of your site, what's the story that you're trying to walk people through, there's this great set of books and a whole framework called Story Brand. You can look online. I highly recommend it. It's a cheap, easy read. But basically, the concept here is that humans universally innately understand this story of the hero's journey, and you see this in all throughout history and pop culture. Star Wars is based on the hero's journey, and it's basically this framework where there is a hero who's encountering a problem, who meets a guide that tells them the plan and calls them into action that results in their success and helps them avoid failure. Now, in this story, your target audience is the hero, and they're encountering a problem, which is the reason that they're considering purchasing whatever it is you have. And then they meet a guide who is you, and you give them a plan and call them to action that results in success and helps them avoid failure. So this might look like, in practicality, if we talk back about original client, a chief technology officer is lost and overwhelmed trying to implement an intelligent automation platform. So here's the hero who has a problem. He meets artificial intelligent partners who give him the knowledge, plan, and guidance he needs to be successful. He has what he needs to get buy-in from formal leadership and his team, resulting in a successful implementation, which lowers costs and improves employee morale. He avoids costly mishaps, which could negatively impact his career and feelings of self-worth. So it's just kind of trying to understand what is the story that this person's going on, and then how can we play a part. So we can structure our messaging around this idea that we need to be the partner who's going to give him the knowledge, plan, and guidance to be successful. We can talk about that, about how we're going to help him overcome these hurdles that we understand he has, and how this is going to help him avoid that emotional pain that he might feel, that we know he's feeling, of having a negative impact on his career and feelings of self-worth. Now, a couple of exercises you're going to want to do as well is kind of maybe getting to a little bit more practical. Think about, if a website visitor landed on your site and only remembered 3 things after visiting your site, what would those be? We have a very limited set of attention and memory, so people aren't going to remember every aspect of whatever it is you do. So what are the 3 most important things? This is just kind of a way to prioritize what's most important we want to tell them, or most important that they want to know about. And then going back and through all your buyer models and categorizing, and prioritizing all the questions and objections. So you're going to come back with a whole list of questions and objections. These are all things that need to be spoken to on the website. And it's important to group them, put them all in one place, and then prioritize them. Which are most important? Which seem to come up most often? And which seem like were the biggest influencers on their behavior or decisions. Then you need to think a little bit about what makes you radically different from your competitors. This is a huge portion of the logic piece. People want to feel like they made the right decision, especially when they're considering other options. So you need to tell them why. So calling out the 3 radical differentiators between you and your competitors is going to help them do that. This is a place where you're going to have to be really honest with yourself. What makes us really different? And if you can't think of anything, then that's something you need to work on. And I will say, one thing about this is you don't necessarily have to be significantly different if you just talk about it better and more often. So you got to pick kind of the 3 things that you think make you most different. Now, from here, you need to think a bit more about tone. So tone, again, is more about the kind of the voice. So in the wording and the messaging, what tone do you have there, but also the look and feel. Now, I'll go back to that earlier slide where I talked about what's more important, what you want versus what your user wants. This is another place where you want to prioritize your target audience a bit more than yourself. So essentially, this is a branding exercise where you're trying to figure out what sort of personality are we trying to convey. And it's very easy in this to fall into the trap of saying, what sort of brand do we want to be? But ultimately, what you're looking for is identifying what sort of brand or company or website is our target audience looking for. Because what you want it to do is for them to land on the site, and the tone of the design, the look and feel, and the wording and the messaging, all of it kind of adds up together where they say, hey, this is exactly what I was looking for. I just get the sense this just really feels right. Again, that feeling, that emotional sense. So in this exercise, you can go through here and look at the two words that are nearly opposing characteristics, conservative and progressive, and identify should the website and the tone feel more progressive or conservative, to what extent. Now, one important caveat I'll say here, to add on to this, is that you don't have to be a designer or a copywriter for any of this section. You can hire a designer, you can hire a copywriter. I'm not a great copywriter. I'm a designer by trade. Having this information is going to make them much more successful. So you can hand this off to your copywriter or your designer, and they can see and interpret and say, okay, we're going for a progressive look and feel, or we're going for a progressive voice. So go through here and, you kind of pick your numbers. Okay, they're looking for a progressive company. They want something that's pretty modern. They're going to resonate better with something that's a little more quirky, or maybe they want something that's more friendly or corporate. And you kind of go through each of these, and it's a place to kind of identify what you're going for. And it's also a really good place to react to content and design that's created later. You can kind of look at it and say, how does this line up to what we were looking for? And again, the idea is that when people land here, it should resonate with them emotionally. It should feel right. It's going to be less about the logic, and it's going to be more about that feeling. Now, once you have all those things done, now you can start thinking about the strategy of your key pages. So if you ever have been at all involved in any sort of web design or managing a website, at some point, okay, we're going to have a homepage. What goes on it? What order? How do I structure this in a way that it's going to be successful, that's going to get people to do what I want them to do? And that's what we're talking about here. So we're trying to get away from what does it look like and think more about how do we approach these key pages. So what we do at the agency at 3.7 Designs is we kind of go back to our buyer models, and for each of those, we look at these key things. What are their top tasks at each stage of the buyer's journey? So awareness, when they know that they have a problem but don't know how to solve it. If they land on the site, what are they trying to accomplish? What's that main task they're trying to do? Consideration. What are they trying to do there when they're trying to decide what vendor to go with, or maybe to create like a long list of options? And then when they're trying to make that final decision, what are they coming to the site to do? Based on that, that's going to tell you what the top pages and sections of the site are. So these are places we're going to want to put more effort into, especially at first. And then what conversion points are there for each of these? So ideally, you're going to have a conversion point for each stage in the funnel. And how are you going to try and ask them to convert at that stage? You can also at this stage start thinking about persuasive design patterns. So there's these common patterns that humans pretty universally react to because they all kind of tie back to fight or flight, and kind of these innate reptilian sort of evolutionary characteristics of us. And as you've gone through this process, there's going to be certain ones out of the 60 plus that there are that seem like they're going to be a little bit more effective. And you can pull them out here and say, okay, this is a place we can tell that we're going to need to use some authority here, or some social proof. And then putting together an ideal user flow. So, based on all this information, you're going to get a pretty good idea of what information your buyer models are going to want to have before they make a decision, which will then map to here's the pages we have that talk about those things. And so here, ideally, is the flow that we want them to go through. Not everybody's going to do it, but at least kind of knowing this will help you create an easy path to get to those things, whether it's nudges, call to action buttons, prioritizing certain things in navigation, etc. In the deck that I send, you'll see there actually is a slide that has a whole lot of these persuasive design patterns. So that's one of the things you can get if you download it. And then based on this, it's going to help you inform your sitemap and navigation. This is pretty key. So how people find information, this is just really a matter of figuring out how do you label things, how do you group things so it makes sense, so it reflects the sort of things that they're thinking of. And then one of the really important things is then figuring out the pages themselves. So going through each of these key pages that you've identified through the couple slides earlier, and first thinking through what are the goals of the page? Why does it exist? What is the context of the page? Meaning, when does somebody land on this page? Is it from another page? Is it a landing page? Is it the first page? Is it the last page? What you want them to do next, being very clear about that, and what they're trying to get out of that page with the desired information. And so based on this, you can just block out. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can just be a sketch. Okay, now I know these things, and kind of overlaying your buyer models, it becomes pretty easy to say, okay, here's the most important things. Let's put this section here. Here's the different messages we need to have. And you can even kind of start working in some of those persuasive design patterns that you see kind of outlined here, like optimism bias and social proof. You want to go through and do this for each of your key pages. And finally, you want to think about your calls to action. So this is, a call to action is literally anytime you're asking the user to do something, like click here, watch this video, contact us. Asking a user to do something makes it much more likely that they're actually going to do it. Compared to just hoping that they figure it out. Some people won't know, and it's amazing. Just asking someone to do something makes it more likely that they're going to do it. So, similar to a few slides earlier, you're going to want calls to action for every stage of the funnel. And at each stage, there's some things you want to think about. For example, where you're going to place it, maybe some logistical things. But kind of the main things is you want to think about what are the emotional benefits that somebody will have by taking this action. Because if it's not clear how the user is going to benefit from it, they're not going to do it. They've got other things to do. It needs to be very clear that it's worth their time and investment. So first, you want to think about what are the emotional benefits. Maybe that's having confidence in the future, feeling secure. And then again, the logical benefits. How can they justify that feeling that, yes, I should do this? And you should also call out, what objections they might have as well, because if there is a potential objection like, hey, I don't have time to watch a webinar, and you say, oh, it's only 18 minutes long, they might say, okay, actually, I do have time to watch that. You can kind of prevent them from moving forward in that stage. So yeah, really important to think about, having calls to action. What do you want them to do? And then making sure it's clear how they're going to benefit from it. Poorly executed calls to action don't work very well. So ultimately, those are the things that if you put all those together, it'll create a really clear plan of how you need to either design your site from scratch or potentially readjust and realign your website to make it more effective so that more people really resonate with what it is you're offering and they're more likely to purchase. So to kind of recap some of the things we talked about, your website, the way you should think about approaching it is you've got your business objectives and your user needs, and you want to find and focus on that critical overlap of where do we benefit and where do our users benefit. A lot of times it comes down to prioritization, where it might be really tempting to really focus on what do we want, the reasons why we want our website to exist, and deprioritize what users want. But instead, you really want to prioritize the target audience, your target audience. What are they coming to the site for? What do they want to get out of it? And if you can give that to them, they're much more likely to purchase, both emotionally and logically. Similarly, don't put too much emphasis on logic. It needs to be there, but really understand that it's not emotion playing a very small role in the decision. It's actually emotion plays a majority role in the decision, and logic is used to justify things afterwards. And the way that you can do this and actually execute this on your website, whether again you're building a new one or you're working on a landing page or adjusting your current one, is first do a saturation dive, get as much information as possible about your target audience, synthesize that into a buyer model, and then based on the information, you can pull out what are the key messages, what should the tone be. Then you can move into the page strategy where you figure out what should the navigation be, how do we label things, and then for our key pages, how do we structure those, what are the persuasive design patterns that we want to use, what information needs to be there, and how do we move people through the journey on our site. And finally, you get people to actually act by creating really compelling calls to action that address their emotional needs and give them logical reasons where they can justify why I'm doing these things. So my name is Ross Johnson. I'm a designer and strategist in an agency called 3.7 Designs, which I founded in 2005. I also we have a sister company called Snap Orbital, where we sell some plugins to popular plugins like LearnDash and WooCommerce and easy digital downloads. We also have our own project management plugin at projectpanorama.com. And if you want, you can download the workbook that we use with clients and that I demonstrate here at 3.7designs.co/design psychology webinar. It's completely free. Just download it. Feel free to use it and hope you find it useful. So that is the end of the show or the presentation. So I think it's probably time for Q&A.
Yeah. Ross, that was fantastic. We've got a couple questions here, and I've got a couple of my own. For anyone who's watching, if you do have a question, feel free to enter it now. There's like a 20-second delay, so go ahead and ask your questions now, so that there's time for them to populate, and I can ask them to you. So let me start with there's a couple great questions. But let me just start with one big thing is you covered so many topics in this webinar. For I go to I love marketing conferences. I love going to marketing events and learning about frameworks. But you covered the buyer's journey, the jobs to be done framework, which I usually put more in the product camp, less in marketing camp, but it was great. The 5 whys, the logic map. Another one that I picked up from Brene Brown, which is like personal development, is like human beings are emotional machines, not logic machines.
Mhm.
A story brand, which I did see at an e-commerce conference. So like at least 6 frameworks. So for anyone who's watching, if you were overloaded isn't the right word, but if you want to dig in more, I think all 6 of those topics have books written about them.
Yes.
So there's infinite depth here of you can go a lot further in each of these. So you covered a lot. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I will say for anybody who feels intimidated by the amount of frameworks, a lot of those you don't necessarily have to read like an entire book to start using.
Mhm.
You could read a blog post or 2, get the gist of it, and then start practicing it. And then, if it seems like it's helpful, you can buy the book or the course and really fine tune it.
Yeah.
Mm.
So let me start with just a question I had here is you talked about people make decisions emotionally and then they justify them with logic. And that's great for life. It's great for business. I think about it a lot. Do you, so you're aware of that. Great. People make decisions with logic. What do I do with that? Like, do I put that into my copy? So let me give you an example here. These 5 features will help you run a stress-free business. Like, do you put the emotions in the copy? Because I don't think you can like make someone feel a thing, but maybe you can make it more likely for them to feel a thing. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to work it into your messaging. Now, it doesn't have to be explicit. Like, you don't necessarily have to say, um, "We know you're worried about losing your job,"
Uh-huh.
but you might want to use more emotionally charged words, or like at least kind of understand that somebody's coming there with that fear, and maybe one of the things your messaging is trying to do is help them overcome that fear. Trying to give them that sense of security and safety. We're going to be here to make sure that doesn't happen. Um, that the copywriters probably have a better idea of like how exactly to word it. As a designer, typically what we'll do is hand the copywriter the page strategy and say, what we're trying to do in this section is kind of address these emotions that they're having, and then they kind of find the best way to phrase it specifically.
Fantastic. I will go ahead and just put up some kudos here. It's just nice to see them. So it's nice to see that a bunch of people really appreciated your presentation here. While I'm pulling those up, one person did ask for the link again. So I'll also put the link there at the bottom. That's where your notes will be. And then I'll let that sit up there on the screen for a minute, and then I'll put up the other link. So I'll let that sit up there for a second, and let me pull up one of these other questions here, which I thought this one was really good. So this is from Patrick. I'm not going to get the last name. So just Patrick. How do you deal with the issue of what people think they want versus what they actually want? You use the example of why 3 times or 5 times, but how can you do that on the site itself? And how can you do it when people maybe think they want something, but your solution gives them something slightly different that they might actually like more if they dig into it a little bit longer? I think that's what the question is.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's probably a couple ways you might handle this. One is maybe you want to speak to what they think they want, especially if you're not getting a chance to talk to them directly before they actually purchase. Maybe you want to talk about how, you could solve this problem, or potentially you could call it out directly. I think that's the other thing is like you might think you want this, but in actuality, this is how this is going to better benefit you. You create some articles or blog posts around it, maybe a video, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think the more I think about it, really, it probably pays. It'd probably be effective to really try and address it directly. Like if you know they're thinking something else, why not call it out? Why not demonstrate that you understand what they're thinking, and then tell them why your solution is a better solution?
So let me follow up on this. I think a lot of people say, oh, I want to go to the gym and work out really hard for 30 days and then have an immediate beach body. And I think as a trainer, you're probably like, you probably want a weekly routine, right? Where like slow and steady progress. So I think that's a good example. So, I'm putting on my marketing hat. What I say, would I like write a piece of content or put something on the homepage that says, that talks about, the 30-day binge workout versus is that kind of how you would address that? Is you would
Yeah.
still acknowledge it's a real thing, but then tell them why your method is better.
Exactly. Yeah, you might have a section that says maybe like very specifically, we understand you're hoping for results in 30 days. That
Mm-hmm.
would be great. We all would, who wouldn't want to look significantly different in 30 days? But here's the reality. Like, even
Yes.
if you could work out super hard for 30 days and get results, that's not sustainable. What you need
Yes.
is a sustainable program. If you want your goals to reach your goals, which we think are X, Y, and Z, here's what's going to get there. It's kind of going back to that story brand framework where they have this problem. You're the guide. So you're telling them, here is the plan that's going to get the results that you want.
Perfect. Here's another one. This is more of a Paid Memberships Pro question, so I'll take this one. People always ask about different themes. I'm not specifically familiar with Aardvark, but if you Paid Memberships Pro works with any theme. That's one of the best things about WordPress is most plugins should work with any theme. We do have our MemberLite theme if you want something that's made by us. And then the other thing I'll recommend here is the Gutenberg block editor is getting better and better. And just this year, they've really started pushing out these Gutenberg first themes. That's not quite right. Block first themes. I forgot exactly what they're called, but go to WordPress.org and look up some of those like themes that are based in blocks. That's sort of the next era of WordPress themes that are just starting to come out. If you're building a new site, look into one of those, just because that's what's going to be around in 3 to 4 years. So that would be my tip for you there. Let me put up another kudos while I find the next question. It's nice to see when people appreciate a presentation style. So Katie liked your presentation style there.
No, thank you, Katie.
So here's another one from Jason. Oops, sorry. Oh no, that's a good one. So here's a great one. If you offer a free membership product or free digital product of whatever type, the free one is usually a step in the buyer's journey to get the paid thing, or a fraction, 50%, 10%, 90%, some percent of people go on and get the paid thing. Is it possible to have call to actions for both? Like, cause let's say someone's a brand new prospect and they don't have the free product. Do I try to sell them? Do I try to get them to sign up for the free product? Or, some percent of people, 5% of people may just jump straight to the paid product. Do I have a separate call to action for people who are like ready to buy today? How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think you can do both. You certainly can have calls to action for both. And the way that I would think about that is kind of going back to prioritization, which is a big part of design in general. A lot of design is really just figuring out what's more important and then making sure that it's prioritized in the page of the site itself. So what I would do is figure out which one of those happens most often or kind of drives the biggest volume of business. Is if it is that most people are going to sign up for free and then upsell at some point in the journey, then certainly you're not going to want to prioritize the thing that's less effective. So I would put more attention to the one that's driving more business, and then have the other one visible and obvious, but just maybe less. The ways you could deprioritize it, maybe it's less visually striking, like it just draws less attention, or maybe it's not in all the same places. Like there's only certain parts of the site that the more engaged people, the people who are more likely to jump right in, that's where it shows up. The thing you don't want to do is have both of them next to each other equally, because it becomes much harder to decide which one do I do. Like if I tell you, remember the number 24 and 99, that's going to be a lot harder than if I just said, remember the number 24. So
Right.
trying to split their focus is always going to be less effective.
Perfect. Yeah, there is something I remember some optimization tips from years ago is you want to give people almost as few choices as possible so they don't mess it up. And giving someone, download the free product is really hard to mess up because you've asked them to do one thing versus download the free product. Or if you're ready, buy the premium product. There's a chance some people just do nothing. So got it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the more options you have, the less likely you are to make a decision. So if you can simplify it to a yes or no, that tends to work the best.
Perfect. Just following up on Aardvark, Jason looked it up and it looks like they were designed for this plugin. Yay! So we're good there. Perfect. So Jason had another question about emotions. Let me try to find this question. So it's two-part here. Which emotions work best for marketing? That's part one. And part two, if it's fear, how can we get comfortable with invoking the feeling if it doesn't come natural? So number one, which emotions work best for marketing? And number two, specifically about fear.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's hard to say that any emotion works specifically better than the others. It's really situational. So, like, w- the situation that somebody's in is going to kind of dictate like what emotion kind of drives them to act. I will say though that fear of loss in general is a pretty strong innate human characteristic, and so that one does tend to work pretty well. So, I think the thing to keep in mind is that you're if fear is going to motivate somebody, it's not necessarily that you're trying to like scare the living daylights out of them. In most situations, like maybe if you're selling security products or insurance or that sort of thing, maybe that is what you're trying to do. But maybe it's just kind of this underlying fear that things won't go well, or that something's not going to work out, or I won't be successful. And it's not so much that you want to try and like use it in an unethical, mean way, but just kind of acknowledging what they're already feeling and then framing it in a positive way of saying, we're going to help you get out of this situation. And as long as that's actually what you're doing, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If your product or service actually helps people overcome that fear, then I think it's a great thing.
Perfect. I think I'll put up another kudos while I have one more question here. I think the question is, when should people think about this? And specifically, lots of people use our software as they're fleshing out an idea, right? So they have a membership site idea. They think they want to talk about it's a monthly fitness newsletter, something like that. At what point do they start using design psychology? Is it from day one, or is it, here, I will admit something. I don't do any sort of, I have a background as a developer. I don't do any sort of automated tests until a plugin has like 50 sales. Like, I'm not building automated testing until until there's 50 sales. Is there like a threshold for when you should really start digging in? Because this is a lot of time and research, and I know there's a payoff, but I'm just wondering at what point does that payoff and the time and effort become like 100% useful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there is some overlap almost from like a product design standpoint where, the research and insights you're going to get from better understanding your target audience could shape, the product itself and the features and, what your go-to-market looks like. So some of the stuff you might have already done, but if not, I think the moment you're getting ready to just start promoting it, like you want people to start using it more than maybe like a closed beta or something like that. I think that's a really good point. You don't necessarily have to go through kind of the full process that we talked about there, but at least kind of get your buyer models done, like do the research, synthesize that information, because having that background is going to help all of your promotional decisions, even if it's not touching your website.
Yeah, I'll just share that I did some buyer research last summer, and we have these different users, people who use membership sites for different use cases, and we thought that like one of them would love the premium product, and it turned out they were the people least likely to like the premium product, and this other group was, and we didn't know that until we did the research, and then that helps us change our marketing material. So it does seem like you don't want to wait too long. Because otherwise you're leaving money on the table, right? Of all these potential visitors that had the wrong message sent to them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. There's always surprises. Like every time we've ever done this, there's always surprises. And that's part of the fun. It's like you go into it, everybody's like sure of one thing, and you come out of it and you're like, wow, we were completely wrong.
Perfect. Ross has been helpful. I think we got all the questions. I'm pretty sure if I missed one, apologies. Go ahead and send us a DM on Twitter or on Facebook, and we'll try to get to it. I will just add one more time. So the little banners at the bottom of the screen. So we will have a recording, which I think it should just be there right now, on our site. And then Ross, I'm gonna put up his URL. Has the notes and the slides and the workbook on your site. So lots of great stuff for everyone to follow up with here. We hope you really enjoyed this webinar. Ross, thank you so much for coming on. I think people learned a lot. You gave people so many frameworks for them to spend the next year reading up on.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. Hope everybody found it useful. And I look forward to seeing a lot of very effective websites in the near future.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.